Okay, I think we're going to start now. Fabiana, maybe with some introduction. Our first words would be to warmly thank you, and especially the Italian people coming from Roma mainly. We also have Maria Teresa online, and Valeria Falce is showing up in a moment, I guess. So thank you very much to my Italian colleagues who is with us, and thanks to Fabiana as well to organize this seminar with me. I think it's a very good way to celebrate Franco-Italian friendship. This event is, I think the origins of this event is a discussion at the Ascola conference with Fabiana. We were just wondering what could be the topic of future relationship between France and Italy. And we had this idea to organize a seminar in Aix. The last seminar we have organized in the Centre de Droit Économique here in Aix was a seminar on digital platforms. It was a German and French seminar. So this year we are working with pleasure with our Italian colleagues. I also would like to say that this seminar is clearly an academic seminar. Even if we had discussions with Meta to organize this conference with them and with other private entities. Finally, Meta couldn't make it today, but I just wanted to disclose that we do not have any funding from Meta, and it's a purely academic event to reflect on this new question of the regulation of Metaverse. And it is also a Mediterranean style seminar. I mean, I hope this seminar is going to be quite informal. The idea is not to introduce a paper, present a paper, but clearly to discuss about this topic. So it could be informal, I hope, and friendly, of course, as always. And I'm really glad to say also that we're going to have in Aix-en-Provence other seminars on the same question of the regulation of Metaverse. Our colleague Thierry Granier, who might be online today, is going to lead this research program on Metaverse with various aspects on tax law and financial services law and so on. So this seminar about mainly competition law will be a first stone, but there are other seminars coming up. Okay, so once again, thank you very much. And I would like also to warmly thank Andrea Pezzoli and Henri Piffaut for this dual keynote presentation. The chair of the keynote session will be Marc Mossé. Marc is associate professor here in Aix-en-Provence. He was former head of the legal services in Microsoft, and now he's a lawyer and an associate professor. So he'll have a lot of insight for us. Henri, as you may know, Vice-Président of the Autorité, della, and General at the Autorità, Garante, della, Concurrenza, and Mercato. So
Italian competition authority. Simpler.
I'm so desperate because I have any origins that I'm not even able to see something. I'm really sorry. Fabiana?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, thank you all the people who are here for being with us today. And I'm very happy to welcome you and to being here. Finally, with the cold weather, after having been here quite a long time ago now. It's been
2019.
19, yes. with the quite hot weather, as most of the people who know Ascola also experienced. So not just a few words left to say, one of which is that this is only the first round of initiatives that is French or Franco-Italian, depending on where we are heading. We are actually hosting the event. So today is the Italo-French, and next time it will be the Franco-Italian initiative on digital. We accepted this for several reasons, but we are of course discussing about some additional issues related to the metaverse for this time. So we will have another round in Italy, and this might probably take place in Rome or eventually in Lecce, or we will see. Second thing I would like to say is that we are planning to edit a book, possibly out of this conference. And because, as I heard yesterday at a conference on computational antitrust, it seems that the persistent metaverse, the one we are heading towards, is gonna happen and occur only in 20-year time. You will have plenty of time to draft your papers and to revise your notes and to hand in your article. So I would, we will be very happy if you would submit your papers to this collection. And also, I would like to add that this initiative is comes within Ascola. In Ascola, as you might know, is the Academic Society for Competition. Also, we have organized this within the many activities that the international association, of which we are both members of the board, organizes locally. And for this reason, we're also very thankful to Ascola for providing us with their support. And that would be all from my part. And now I will give the chair to Marc Mossé and thanking him again for being here today with us.
Thank you, Fabiana. Thank you, David. So I will be brief because I'm here to listen to Andrea and Henri. But just one short comment, because I think this today's discussion on metaverse is very timely. In fact, not only because the EU Commission announced the plan for metaverse in 2022, but also because yesterday Nick Clegg, who is the Vice-President for Regulatory and Garante, was in Brussels to discuss, I assume, metaverse, and he got some question on the future of the metaverse. And also how to regulate the metaverse. And he made the point to be interesting for the regulators, which is we need, I'm not quoting him exactly, not a verbatim, what I've heard, we need to work together, companies, experts, and regulators, to anticipate what is coming and to figure out the relevant answer to this new set of questions. And so I don't know if you had any discussion in advance with Nick Clegg, but I think it's super timely to have this today's panel here in Aix-en-Provence. I would add another comment before to give you the floor, which is, and I think it was one of the questions to Nick Clegg: does the metaverse will be a success, a failure? Does the metaverse will exist in time? And he said the biggest bet is ahead of us. So it's a very nice answer to this kind of question. But I had a look to the number, and in particular the report from Gartner from last year, saying that about 26% of people will have 1 hour daily on Metaverse, on different activities in 2026, which is, I don't know for the book, but quite tomorrow, on gaming, shopping, working, socializing, maybe other activities we don't know yet at some point. And in fact, this report, and again, this is Gartner, it's not McKinsey, but it's Gartner. It's just some assumption, but and when we look at the number of investment from the big tech companies, show that something is happening. And I always remember to say way the report from Gérard Terry. I don't know if you remember. Gérard Terry issued a report to the Prime Minister in France in 1994. Not so long, but quite some time. And in this report, in the intro, it's super interesting. He said, Internet will never work to deliver business services to anyone. So it was apparently a good bet. And why I'm saying this, because it's a kind of evident that it's always super difficult to anticipate how this technology could land and what they will, at the end of the day, provide for the society and for the economy. The only thing that we tend to consider, and this is the most difficult even for the lawyer or the economist or the regulator, is that there is a difference between the technology and the usage. And often we focus on the technology, which is at some point the easiest way because something super rational. But where we need also to have a look to is the usage from consumer businesses. And I'm sure that for a regulator, this is a kind of bet to do as well, how to regulate these new technologies and the usage that will develop and rise in the future. Antitrust, merger and acquisition, dark pattern, all these interesting questions we know are ahead of us in the metaverse. Maybe we will just use the tool we already have, in particular the DMA, which is there. Maybe we have to invent a new set of tools like the Commission is working on. I don't know, but maybe you already have the answer to this question. And I'm sure that Andrea, you will start, if I'm not wrong. I don't want to surprise you in saying this, but you will start to give this answer to this easy question, and then Henri, you will tell us how to convert this universe beyond universe.
Firstly, I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation. Can I? I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation. I mean, David and Fabiana in particular. And when Fabiana told me about the possibility to take part in this seminar, my first reaction was like that. Again, another seminar concerning digital world and competition law. So, I mean, I thought it was enough. I don't want to be like Batman, but I mean, that was my first reaction. There is a minor Italian politician who uses to say my first reaction, shock. I don't mention the name, but anyway, that was my first reaction. But nevertheless, I think that even if today is not as hot as in 2019, and indeed it is quite cold, I hope, I'm pretty sure that the debate and the discussion will be quite hot because of the lively debate and the lively discussion. So let's start. And I mean, of course, my intervention will focus on this new phenomenon, metaverses, from the perspective of an antitrust enforcer. So, I mean, the second coming out is that I'm an economist. I'm sorry, but I mean, after 25 years, I mean, with lawyers now. I am a sort of hybrid and I'm hermaphrodite, but I mean, I still think to be decent economist. So, I mean, but I'd like to start to frame to set the table, if you like, my intervention, starting with some preliminary remarks. I think that, I mean, the first slide was a joke. I think that technology is not always as a move. Okay. Sorry.
Ça a marché tout à l'heure.
So we are moving too fast towards new technologies. You know. Okay, that's it.
Sorry.
No, never mind. I mean, I think that times, I mean, they are changing, as a very sophisticated quotation. And I think that, I mean, competition agencies, competition authorities have to need a continuous updating. So, and it is quite funny because, I mean, in this continuous updating, what happens during this continuous change of challenges, new challenges, now there is a sort of back to the origins. I mean, within the antitrust community, we see that there is the renaissance of an old approach, the so-called the Brandeisian approach. Lina Khan, we see the picture of the judge, and it is an approach that it is also called the hipster approach, I mean, from the side of the people who don't particularly like this new approach. And I think that this approach, I mean, put on the table some important questions, because competition concerns are nowadays often intertwined with other issues concerning privacy, pluralism, democracy, sustainability, inequality. Let's call them, I mean, general interest of the public, or general interests. And I think that it cannot be denied that this intertwining does affect the attitude towards digital platforms, big tech, and why not metaverses. I think that, I mean, when we look at these new phenomena, even with the perspective, with the lens of antitrust enforcers, the risk is that behind there is a bias which is determined more than the impact of the new phenomenon on pluralism, democracy, sustainability, inequality, and the like, rather than on specific competition concerns. So there is a sort of continuous tension between public interest goals, as I say, the privacy, pluralism, and the like, and the more traditional goal of I could have written also goals as plural, as the protection of the competitive process of the consumer welfare standard. I mean, more or less enriched, because I mean, the consumer welfare standard could mean a lot of things, a lot of different things. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves is competition law the most appropriate tool to address public interest goals? Directly, I mean, there is there are some experts, some economists, even some authorities who would like to put as a direct goal of the competitive assessment something else than the protection of the competitive process or the consumer welfare standard, including sustainability. I think of the guidelines of the Dutch authority, or inequality. There are some specific situations for instance, I think of South Africa, where there is an explicit part of the competition law which is dedicated to social inclusion. But I mean, we all know that the South African situation is a very, very specific one, unfortunately. Otherwise, there is another way, another path, and from my point of view, is a much sounder path, which is to consider these public interest goals as byproducts of the strict, rigorous application of competition rules. You can achieve these goals indirectly as a sort of externality. I mean, emphasizing the role which could be played by priorities. ECN Plus suggested strongly to the competition authorities to use priorities, external or even internal priorities, and in choosing the investigations, I mean, for cases which concern, I don't know, waste management rather than local transport, rather than pharmaceutical, possibly you can give an important contribution to the in favor of the reduction of inequality. I mean, if public services work efficiently, I mean, it is the, let's say, the poorer are the part of the society which benefit more. Or if you make waste management more efficient and more competitive, I mean, you achieve at the same time goals concerning sustainability. But it is a byproduct. It is, I mean, we have, I mean, limited resources, so we have to choose whether, I mean, open an investigation or another. So, I mean, this could be, I don't think that it is a question of purity. I am not particularly fond of purity of competition law. Competition policy is something very flexible. I mean, it started with the goal of the economic democracy. For Europe, it's a sort of the single market. So, I mean, there is a lot of history behind the goals of competition law. So, I mean, purity is a fantastic book, but it is not necessarily a goal that we have to keep in mind too strictly. I think, and this is the conclusion of the preliminary remarks, that antitrust needs a continuous updating because the new challenges are very challenging. I think also that, I mean, our toolkit is still quite standard, so we need a continuous updating, but a lot of the new challenges have really remind us something. I mean, for instance, when I think of algorithms and what to do with the algorithms which facilitated collusion, I think that is the old story, the very problematic old story of the thin line between explicit and implicit or tacit collusion. It is an old question for people who are fond of antitrust challenges. But I also think that antitrust enforcement is not self-sufficient for a number of different reasons. First of all, because, I mean, in the long run, for instance, if we fight, if we want that antitrust could give a contribution for the reduction of inequality, I think that in the long run, it is quite obvious. I mean, it erodes the rents. So it is in favor of a higher level of equality. But the short run is very important. And in the short run, we need public policies which could support the transition. So I think that this is one of the reasons. And remaining in the fantastic world of the digital challenges, I think that there are a number of different reasons why we need regulation, why we need a collaboration with the privacy agencies. I mean, cooperation, I'll try to demonstrate it in the second part of my presentation. It's a crucial point when we have to regulate new phenomena like metaverses, or metaverses. Again, the plural is something which is very quite committing, but anyway. So I think that is, I mean, I'm here in France. I stole this fantastic slide from Frédéric Geny, and I think that competition authorities will just keep crashing if they never take their eyes off the rear view mirror. So we have to update, to look forward, to look at the future. But I mean, allow me that I really love lipstick. So please, especially the female part of the public, don't abandon the lipstick. So don't look at the rear mirror, but the lipstick could play an important and crucial role. And again, in order to stress that antitrust needs public policies, I think that I mean, this fantastic cover of the record by the Beatles, with a little help from my friends, I mean, in this way, I mean that we need public policies which are market friendly. I mean, market friendly is a fantastic expression which could mean almost everything, but I mean, I want public policy which protect people, users, consumers for a more competitive world, not protecting people from competition. Sometimes, I mean, public policies are meant as a sort of protection from competition. It is not like that. Market-friendly policies are something different, and they are crucial, especially in the short run, because in the short run, if you need efficiency, sometimes could go out of the markets. Barrier to exit are as important as barrier to entry. So especially in Italy, where there is a very high, very low productivity level, we need something to facilitate the exit from the market. But the exit from the market is a very problematic and social issue that we need to address with specific policies. And now we can indirectly, if you like, deal with the new kid of the block. I mean, here there is a slide, I'm not responsible of it. Professor Fabiana de Porto is the one, because I mean, there was another slide. I mean, you can look at Fabiana with the glasses. I mean, she's ecotic, so she wants to be part of a presentation. And I mean, that's me, it's not my fault. But anyway, the new kid of the block is and I think that so okay, it's a public, no, that is not a privacy problem. So what I would like to talk with is these 5 bullet points, if you like. I mean, my first question is, I mean, metaverses and digital concerns, but it's just name changing. Are we dealing just with the same problems that we dealt with when we tried to a better understanding of the digital world, of ecosystems, or it is something specific? I'm not sure that it is something specific, that there are some distinctive features, of course, but by and large, the challenges are the challenges that we are trying to deal with when we began to deal with the digital era, digital world, digital markets, whatever they mean. I don't know what a digital market is still, because I mean, I think that almost everything is affected by data, by digital revolution. So, but anyway, we can share, we can understand what I'm trying to say. Are the challenges raised by metaverses by and large the same as those raised by the digital economy? And from an antitrust perspective, at least now, should we really be concerned about metaverses? Is there a problem? And apart from the conferences we start, I mean, we were joking during the lunch break. I mean, we started 20 years before. I mean, it is true what Fabiana said, that in 2042 there will be a persistent metaverse. I mean, we started in 2022, possibly. I mean, it's quite a long time. But anyway, and for antitrust agencies, I mean, it is really emerging an antitrust issue, because indeed the number of users doesn't seem to be particularly large at present. Possibly in the future there will be a very fast development, and possibly the time required for the diffusion of metaverses might be longer than expected. I mean, between brackets, you can see some data, possibly they are not so updated, concerning some metaverses. World Horizon, the virtual environment developed by Meta, registers less than 300,000 users per month. Another well-known metaverses as the Central and then the Sandbox have from 38 to 500 users. So not a huge phenomenon. Possibly the data are not precise, but I still think that the phenomenon is really developing. It's just at the very beginning. And I think that especially when we speak of regulation, because the title of the seminar was Regulate Metaverse, I think that it is still what was true, and it is still true for digital platforms. It is even truer for a new phenomenon as metaverses. Again, it's an indirect, implicit quotation of Frédéric Geny, learn to walk before we run. There is a great paper that I suggest about ecosystems, that I mean, you can adjust the lessons even from new phenomena as metaverses. And I think that the unbearable charm, or charm, since we are in France, of regulation and the per se temptation, the per se temptation of regulate something, it's a temptation that we have to keep in mind that might be quite sloppy, it's like dangerous. I think that, for instance, we were talking during the lunch about of course, the Digital Markets Act, and we arrived at the new European regulation, the Digital Markets Act, because of two ingredients, two elements. The first one is under enforcement, and I fully agree. I mean, especially on the other side of the ocean, with respect of the, I mean, in addressing competition policy to digital platforms, they were particularly kind. But also in Europe, we started slowly, and under enforcement was a problem. And also because we needed a quick response. I mean, the great example of a too long application of competition rules was the famous case Google Shopping. I think it is just a, let's say, a very specific case. It's not the rule. It's not the average duration of the investigation. Because, I mean, are we really sure that the duration of antitrust investigation is too long? If we look at the experience at the national level, at the European national competition authorities, it doesn't seem true. I mean, in Italy, the average duration of an Article 1 or 2 case is no longer than 19 months. Not the 7 years of the Google Shopping, 19 months. In France, it's the same. It's always shorter than two years. So the Amazon Apple case, that the brand gating investigation, where we recently concluded, it was an agreement between Amazon and Apple that excluded some resellers of Apple and Beats products from Amazon.it, was opened in July 2020, following a complaint of a small dealer of consumer electronics. The case was closed in November 2021. And it was quite complicated because it was a vertical and horizontal case at the same time. In a way, we anticipated the new regulation concerning the vertical restraints. Was it sufficiently quick? The paradox is now that the case, which is, from my point of view, a very sound case, was clashed by the administrative judge, not because of too long duration, but because it was a too late start. Because we thought too much before launching the investigation. But anyway, we are fighting against this, we are replying against this strange decision of the Italian administrative judge. But this is an example because the case was quite complicated, even though, I mean, the duration is between July 2020 and November 2021. So not that long. This is a broader picture, just to give you the idea of our experience in the digital sector. Of course, we intervened using enforcement tools, advocacy tools, and also exploiting our dual competence, because possibly you don't know, but the Italian Competition Authority has also has to apply the consumer protection law as well. And sometimes it's very important, the complementarity between the two tools. But anyway, we have an idea, and there are some we recently concluded in, let's say, relatively important cases concerning an abuse of Google against a new app experimented by NLX concerning the recharge of electrical car. The Amazon Apple I already mentioned was a 101 case, a vertical and horizontal case. The abuse of Amazon in the logistics sector, the Amazon FBA with a very significant fine of 1 billion to 128, if something like that, million euro, which is now very converging with the measures that are now part of the commitment that the European Commission is assessing in these days. I mean, and I gave you this broader picture because in order to say that when enforcement exploit the benefits of complementarity, of cooperation with other institutions, enforcement could be extremely effective. I mean, I always joke because during the end of these cases that, of course, we investigated in strict cooperation with DG Comp, I almost fell in love with one of his colleagues, Thomas Cramler, because I had continued, in fact, his face is quite self-evident because every day I had a call with Thomas Cramler in order to be as convergent as possible. And believe me, Thomas Cramler is not so beautiful. You can confirm it, okay. No, okay, you have to be institutional, okay. Anyway, all these strange words just to say that, I mean, regulation and antitrust law has to be complementary. I mentioned here, and allow me to a quotation, which is a typical Italian quotation, because the title of the movie in Italy, a very beautiful French movie in Italy, is Quasi Amici, Almost Friends, but the French title is Intouchable. So, I mean, the quotation is not particularly fit, but anyway, we are in an Italian-French connection, Italian-French symposium, so I think it is, I can do it. But I mean, if we want to be concerned anyway, let's say that Metaverse sooner or later will be an antitrust concern. Of course, at least these 5 points might be quite problematic, would be quite interesting. Again, market definition and market power. It's an old story, but I mean, it's a continuously new one. The role which could be played by the essential facility doctrine. Again, essential facility doctrine is a very risky shortcut, so handle with care. Metaverse and collusion, metaverse and mergers review. I think that, I mean, our colleague, our friend, Maria Teresa Maggiolino will be much more precise than I can do here in dealing with the mergers review and metaverse, and broadly speaking, and digital world, killer acquisition and the like, and metaverse and data. And again, about speaking of data, I think that the role of interoperability could be an important ingredient, and I think that Fabiana will be, I hope, at least quite precise and much more interesting than what I am going to say now. But starting from the first one, again, is market definition still relevant for avatars, so not for consumers? We all know that market definition is not as relevant in digital market as in more traditional markets. So market definition is dead. Sometimes we, in some conferences, in some workshops, sometimes somebody says, I mean, market definition is dead. I don't think it's dead. I mean, in the digital world, it is not easy to disentangle market power for bargaining power, economic power, power to poor. Market share may be a poor indicator. We all know all these things. I think that there are also other forms of market power, like the intermediation power. You know, now the new German law, and in a way, even the new reform, the reform of some part of the Italian competition law, let's say, address the problem of the role which could be played by, let's say, gatekeepers. Potential competition plays an increasing crucial role. Competition between ecosystem, competition between metaverses, competition from innovative potential competitor. Again, I hope that Maria Teresa Maggiolino would address these issues when she deal with killer acquisition and, let's say, the acquisition of rivals who do not seem rivals at the moment, but possibly tomorrow. Still, market share may play a significant role to access market power within metaverse. For instance, I mean, if in 2042 there will be a persistent metaverse, possibly the competition game will take place within the metaverse. So we or who will be alive into 2042 will be interested in market share within the metaverse, but I don't know. And again, still about market definition and metaverses, in the digital environment, a proper economic analysis would require a wider attention to the structure of the markets and to freedom to compete. I was discussing with one, I don't remember your name, with him, anyway, he's the guilty one, about the concept of efficiency. And I think that even in the digital world, even within metaverses, disregarding the structure of the market, the competitive assessment may risk to consider today's efficiency as the best predictor of tomorrow's efficiencies and to underestimate the future competitive constraints that may derive from today's less efficient competitors. And this is a great challenge for the as efficient as test. I think that we have, and it's not easy, it's very interesting, we have to apply the as efficient as test in a dynamic way, because I mean, freedom to compete is as important as efficiency today. In the Amazon case I was mentioning before, Amazon FBA, the main defense from Amazon was, I mean, there is an efficiency offense according to the Italian Competition Authority. No, I mean, it was not an efficiency offense. Of course, Amazon is extremely efficient, but it's a question of static efficiency. In order to continue to be efficient, you need somebody who pushes you. And I think that freedom to compete is crucial. In this sense, we need, in this perspective, which is more focused on the protection of the competitive process rather than on the consumer welfare standard. If you have time, reread Eleanor Fox, or a new article by Michele Grillo is going to be published this year. Market structure matters, continues to matter, and consequently, market definition continues to matter and to play a crucial role. Of course, in a completely different frame. Just a brief comment about the role which could be played by the essential facility doctrine in a metaverse. So is there an essential facility issue when we deal with metaverses? In principle, even if metaverses should guarantee a decentralized world, the risk of centralization and competitive concerns related to centralization may arise. So the essential facility may be represented by the infrastructure, and the underlying platform on which metaverses could be based. But I mean, the essential facility doctrine has to be handled with extreme care, because it could be a dangerous shortcut. The competitive assessment might be significantly distorted. I was mentioning before the need for a more dynamic approach. I mean, if the shortcut for essential facility is not that dynamic. Looking at collusion, so interoperable metaverses may have clear and pro-competitive potentialities. So the technology would even favor the presence of multiple metaverses, and specialized metaverses may have weak incentive to compete and hence to collude with generalized platforms. But within metaverse, the relationship between the users of the metaverse and the metaverse itself could be both vertical and horizontal. So the collusive component of the relationship should be isolated. So nothing different from what may occur within marketplaces or within an ecosystem. So again, so the use of a machine learning algorithms may make the fight against quite difficult, since the thin line between independent rational adjustment, so the so-called tacit collusion, and explicit collusion would be even thinner. As far as these issues concern, I am not a fan, as you probably have already understood, but I'm not a fan of excess use of regulation, but I strongly suggest a paper by Harrington, 2018, where he said, okay, I mean, that might be a place, a part of regulation might play an important role in addressing to algorithms which are built in order to facilitate implicit collusion. But the problem is, and since some of you are experts of tech and law, the problem is how to open an algorithms and understand that it has been built with the precise goal of facilitating implicit collusion. There are some problems of intellectual properties that should be addressed and solved. Metaverses and merger review, again, when market definition is unclear, when potential and innovative competitors may be everywhere, merger review becomes quite complex. Merger shares are a poor indicator, market shares are a poor indicator, and the application of the traditional test is not that clear-cut. The poor SNP test is now is not so fashionable. And conglomeral effects, in the past considered absolutely harmless in a digital metaverse environment, may become crucial because of the role played by data. I mean, we have to look at the data as a sort of glue that allows to extend market power from a market where the platform is already strong in another market where the platform is not present yet. So this is very difficult when you assess something where the counterfactual is so fragile, is so thin. And again, acquisition of potential innovative competitors and the counterfactual is the issue that I kindly leave to Maria Teresa for her presentation. Finally, data, but again, there is something which doesn't work. But anyway, it's just a okay.
Is it one?
Okay, yes, okay. Data, shall we say that data are the origin and the very end of metaverses, and that the old social networks are no more effective for data collection? At present, however, it seems too early to speak of metaverses and big data. So the number of users, as I said before, and hence the amount, and hence the amount of collected data doesn't seem to be particularly large. In principle, speaking of data, antitrust enforcers might be concerned of data exploitation. I mentioned during the lunch break, the famous case, Facebook, WhatsApp, the German case, too much data and collected in a not sufficiently transparent manner. It is not widely accepted, and this is important, and one of the final points I would like to make. It is not widely accepted that competition law is the most appropriate tool to cope with privacy violations. And in fact, I mean, in this case, the Italian authority benefited of the dual competence and used consumer protection tools. And it seems still quite controversial how data and privacy issues can be integrated in a sound antitrust assessment. And it is also controversial whether they should be. Finally, this is the institutional, the policy point, if you like. The antitrust enforcement in the digital era requires a higher degree of cooperation between national competition authorities and DG Comp, at the European level, and regulators and data protection agencies. So collaboration with data protection agencies is at the same time crucial and very challenging, because as I used to say, if the DNA with the sectorial regulators by and large is the same, at least they should have, and we speak a common language in a way, even if we continuously fight, because it's not easy to reconcile the two approaches. I mean, with data protection agencies, the DNA is very different. So it's an important challenge, because I mean, in the near future, cases, antitrust investigation concerning also metaverses, I mean, could focus on the role played by data, by individual data as well. And we have to be sure that, I mean, we can share a language with the data protection agencies. I mean, again, and with these slides, I'm going to conclude, we have a successful experiences within the European competition network. There is a continuous collaboration with the DG Comp. I mentioned my relationship with Thomas Kramle.
Your romance.
My romance, let's say. I have to admit it. Don't tell Thomas why. Okay. There are some important investigations during which we had a continuous collaboration, Amazon FBA, Apple Amazon, Google NLX, Google HODA, which is an interesting case in progress. We had also cooperation with the French and Swedish authorities some time ago for the investigation concerning the price parity clauses and the booking case. Cooperation with the same building, which is not that easy, with our colleagues of the consumer protection units. Sometimes the culture, the paternalistic approach, which could be part of a consumer protection policy, is not that consistent with an antitrust approach, even though the complementarity of the two tools could be extremely important. And we also launched and developed and concluded a joint sector inquiry on big data, the antitrust authority, the communication regulator, and the data protection agency. So a threesome, so an interesting variation. So we like strange things. And I mean, the recommendations which the outcome of the sector inquiry was not that banal. So finally, the challenges that might be raised by Metaverse seem to be quite intriguing for competition law, even if not necessarily so different from those raised by the digital platforms. The new kid on the block is no more than a toddler, and we still don't know how fast she will grow up. I think that better understanding is necessary, even if most of the antitrust issues seem to be quite traditional. Another challenge is that we have to frame metaverses in the Digital Markets Act. We hadn't time to speak about the Digital Market Acts, but I mean, I'm quite curious about the development of the new European regulation. And we should resist the temptation to regulate a developing phenomenon without having fully understood what is the problem. Again, the final one. There was a final slide with a quotation, and my finger are not effective. Right. The final step is the very final one. Okay, don't forget that if there is a temptation of a per se regulation somewhere, there might be a scene. Okay. Thank you so much.
Now going to you, Henri, and then after we'll have some time for a Q&A because you already raised a lot of questions. I'm sure that a lot of questions will arise.
So thank you. My voice is a little bit broken, so I hope that you can hear me. I don't have slides because I'm very often technologically challenged, and I was proven right not to have. Thank you very much to have invited me. It's really a pleasure to be back here. Last time it was freaking hot. Today it's freaking cold. I hope that sometimes in here there is a normal weather. Andrea has covered really a lot of contents, and that was really interesting. So I'm going to be very French, and I'm going to be both superficial and intellectualizing things. And I should note and stress that these are only my own intellectualizations and not those of the French Autorité. So when I read the subject on which I was supposed to do this kind of dueling keynote speech, I was thinking, yeah, well, I had difficulties with both words. One is the metaverse. So I used to joke, what is metaphor? And then what is regulation? So just to help myself and perhaps yourself, I thought that I would do my speech in three parts. One is to try to understand collectively what metaverse is. The second one is to understand collectively what regulation is, and lastly, maybe to look at the issue of regulating the metaverse. But before, I think we need to understand a little bit what all this is about. So I asked Benoit Cœuré what he thought of the metaverse, and he pointed me to a tweet which said, and I read it, with just Animal Crossing, but you're being hunted by Mark Zuckerberg. So that's one possible definition. Another possible definition is a massively scaled interoperable network of real-time rendered 3D virtual worlds. And then yet another one, a network of 3D virtual worlds focused on social connections. And the last one, a virtual reality space in which users can interact with a computer-generated environment and other users. So what do we find in that? We find a new technology, which is how you access this universe, and that's virtual reality or augmented reality. You find a presumption that you would have a number of universes, and that's the reason why it's called metaverse, because it's a collection of universes which are supposed to be interoperable. And you find a number of users, whether these users use that for social connection or for other types of connections. And I will be back to that in a second. So I must confess, I am an engineer by background, and when I was very young, I did a lot of programming. So I'm always very keen to try to understand things. So when I looked at that, I was thinking, well, there are many technological challenges here. We are not yet there. We don't even know what's going to be, what it is going to be. Virtual reality is not fully developed. Augmented reality, we are nearly there, but it's not yet exactly there. I mean, who remembers who is wearing still Google glasses? And then, if you want to do some interoperability, good luck between universes. You really need to establish an underlying architecture, technological architecture, which is not yet there. And you would also need lots of computational power in order to run these various universes and make them, interact and make them lively enough for people to use them. So we are really very far away from it. it's in a way today it's a way to try to paint how the future may develop, but we to have absolutely no idea when and what will be the outcome of the efforts that we see, which are not only those of I prefer to call them Facebook because it's easier, which are not only those of Facebook, but also you find other kind of approaches. You have I mean, for those who play video games are in a way the first ones to have invented the metaverse, which is not a metaverse, it's just a virtual universe. And then you have you have Microsoft, which is developing some kind of universe or metaverse, which is centered on more business kind of requirements, like virtual meeting rooms or whatever. So you find a number of approaches which are quite different. That of Facebook's of this world, those of the video gamers, and those of Microsoft and others. And we have no idea how these different approaches, in terms of even one single virtual world, are going to develop and what kind of issues they are going to raise. And then the next step is, if ever they develop and they interoperate, it's going on what kind of architecture is it going to be? Is that interoperability going to be based? And when I say infrastructure, I mean much more than the technological infrastructure, and I will come back to that. So that's my first part. What is Metaverse? I don't have a clear answer. And then now turning to what is regulation. Again, every time I hear regulation, my ears get red, and I get really, I wouldn't say angry, but worried. So I'm not a regulator. For me, it's nearly an insult when people tell me that I am a regulator. I'm a competition law enforcer, or I'm somebody who develops competition policy. And I see really a difference between enforcement and regulation. Why so? Because in a way, regulation sets a world, and within that world, imposes some rules to be respected. And then these rules may be enforced by a regulator, maybe enforced by a judge, but the world is set. There is some kind of fact-finding which has been done, and we know what we know about the do's, we know about the don'ts, and then we know that there is a need to have more information to be able to understand the regulated industry, about the market failure, and how to correct the market failure. Competition law enforcement is rather different. Why so? Because in a way, it's a discovery instrument, competition law enforcement. You have to investigate to understand how is there really a competition law issue. You have to understand how a market is functioning. You do, sectoral inquiries to do that, or you draft opinions, like we are doing as a French authority on the cloud industry. So in a way, the approach is recognizing there is an asymmetry of information, and you want to talk about the asymmetry of information with your investigative powers, and then maybe you're going to find that there are competition issues, and then you try to address the competition issues. When you do that, there are always trade-offs. So there's a trade-off linked to time. Are you going to solve a competition issue for one person quickly, with interim measures, and then possibly a settlement or a transaction? Or are you going to try to set principles? And to do that, then you have to adopt a decision, and the decision is going to be challenged before a court, and the court will, at the first level, will decide something, and the second level will decide something else. It may be bounced back to the first level, or it may be bounced to the European level, and so on and so forth. But then at the end of the day, you have a clear principle. The big difference also that there is between competition law enforcement and regulation is that in competition law enforcement, the underlying principle is that the companies, you're tweaking with the incentives of companies to behave in the market. So you ex-ante, in a way, set a number of principles, and the companies are going to make their self-assessment, much more information than actually the competition authority would have, or any regulator. They are going to make their self-assessment. So is that behavior, or is that project something which may be challengeable or not, maybe raising risks or costs in terms of competition law enforcement. So that's the old model. Now, if you look at the technology industry or the digital industry, here you have technologies which are developed, and then the market for which they are developed is still to be discovered. That's really the issue with the metaverse, for instance. That was the issue with Google when the two guys developed their algorithm to make the research. They had no idea that Google would become a kind of media company. So when the company sets with this new technology, in a way, they don't know what kind of competition law issues they are going to raise in the future, and maybe they are going to fail actually. So there is a big issue of internalizing. Then for these technology companies, for internalizing the potential competition risks that the technology development is bringing, which points to a kind of failure, or a risk of failure of a traditional kind of antitrust approach or competition law enforcement approach, because it comes always too late in a way. And regulation is not going to solve that, because regulation, as I was saying initially, considers the world as it is, or as it used to be, and impose some rules on that world, which is completely different from a ever-changing or ever-evolving world when technology is involved. So you have to, in a way, when we think about regulation or we think about competition enforcement vis-à-vis the metaverse or vis-à-vis the technological sector, you maybe want to reinvent competition law enforcement, maybe with more interactions, and maybe with requirements for auditability of the way technologies are developed, or many different ways to in a way rebalance the asymmetry of information and the timing element that I was mentioning. So that's about regulation and the competition law enforcement. Now turning to the third part, and yeah, I'm still within time. What about regulating the metaverse? So first of all, what I noted is that when we say regulating the metaverse, we don't say the kind of market failure that we are thinking of. Is that competition law? Is that something else? Privacy or consumer protection? So when the first question, Marc, and I'm not going to address that, but we'll come back to that nevertheless, is when we speak about the metaverse. So there's a within the metaverse, but there's a outside of the metaverse. When we think of it, it may raise a number of public policy issues, not just competition issues. And when you think about regulation, you have to think about the various market values or public general public interest issues that may arise. Second, in a way, looking from a competition law perspective, perhaps since this is very much still into its infancy, you could label the question as, how do you deal with potential game-changing technologies? What are the instruments that that can be used within competition law enforcement, or maybe we should use another type of regulation, as I was saying, in order to make sure that there would be the right incentives and no monopolization of new technologies. And so there, I was thinking about it. I thought that there were perhaps three categories of issues that may arise. There's let's say the smaller one, which is the expansion of ecosystems. That's something that we all know very much about. There's developed case law since Microsoft 2004, and that's still developing. But we know that we have the tools. It's more a question of making sure that the information is there, the monitoring is there, and the rapidity of competition and justice is there. The second issue I was thinking of was the acquisition of key technologies. So you feel that there is going to be a game-changing technology that is emerging, And how should you as a market player, how should you react to that? And then for that, we have a number of cases where we have collectively not that very well with them. We have the Facebook, WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram. And why is it that we have difficulties to deal with such cases? There's an informational issue, but the DMA in a way is trying to solve. But I think the main issue is there, and there's no easy answer, is about developing counterfactuals. Why so? Because normally in merger control, what you do is that you use the recent past as a predictor for the future. In technology mergers, one of the big difficulties is that first you have to predict how the combined entity is going to behave in the market, and you don't have much elements in order to do that because of the evolution of technology. But also second, you have to develop not one counterfactual, but various possible counterfactuals on how the market would develop without the acquisition. So take WhatsApp. Maybe WhatsApp would have continued on its own, but maybe WhatsApp could have been bought by Google or by Amazon, and then it would have been a completely different competition game in the market. And that is a very complex matter. And what kind of burden of proof or what kind of investigative tools would you have to use and to develop such counterfactuals? So here there are issues which, to my view, are really unresolved. And then the third category is what I would call the land grab. And so what is the land grab? It's you make sure that a technology or a game changer is not going to be used by your competitors. So the case that jumps to my mind is, for instance, Google Android, where you have a shift from one type of access to the internet, so with PCs, to another type with mobiles, and Google is making sure, I'm referring with my own words the case, but it's making sure that its market power is not going to be challenged by the shift from one type of access to the internet to another type of access to the internet. So here we have some legal instruments or some precedents at hand, but again, how to make sure that you will develop the right counterfactual scenario in that case, we have exactly the same issues as in merger control. Now, the third element about regulating, and I think it's the most interesting one, is to consider the person who runs a virtual world or a platform, or actually a person who would run or who would have developed an architecture for the metaverse, so a collection of universes or virtual worlds, to consider it as a regulator itself. And actually, it's not only a regulator, it's a profit-making regulator. And so first, this regulator would need to address a number of public policy issues. Why so? Because when you run a virtual world, there's everything. There's property, there is money, there is consumer protection issues. You have to make sure that there is no exploitation of people or any racial slurs or whatever. When you look at Animal Crossing, for instance, 2 years ago, there was a central banker. I think it was a beaver. There was a central banker, and that central banker decided to suddenly increase very, very much the interest rates, and that led to a crash to the of some asset prices within Animal Crossing. So these are fascinating because you have the person running the virtual world having a number of hats on its head, as a transport worker, as a competition authority, as a consumer protection authority, perhaps as a privacy authority, etc., etc. But at the same time, that person is profit-making. So its interest is not necessarily aligned with the general interest in achieving these public policies, even if some level of these public policies need to be there. So you cannot let this virtual regulator achieve these public policies on its own. You have to make sure that to the maximum possible, these general interests within the virtual world need to be aligned with the general interest. And that becomes the role of the competition authority, basically how to regulate a regulator. or for profit-making regulator. And here there is a lot of work to be done, and I have no easy solution for that. Maybe just to conclude, intellectually, these virtual worlds, so I'm a bit far away from Metaverse, but these virtual worlds are a fascinating object because you can run experiments. It's a closed entity, so you could develop, say a very libertarian or a completely different way to run competition policy within such a virtual world. You could decide as a governance principle within that virtual world, but there would be perfect information. You can, follow everybody at any possible instant, and therefore that gives you, with that perfect information, ability to intervene whenever you want and to correct behaviors. At the same time, you could pick a completely different governance principle and say that you don't want to see anything of what's happening here, but then how do you intervene as a regulator, and so on and so forth. So there is a very interesting, I think, virtual experiment which could be run, where you could pick a kind of governance model and then try to test how best you could run a competition policy within that governance model. And I will stop with these words. I'm really sorry to have lost all of you within these 20 minutes of talk.
Interesting and very challenging. About all this topic. I will open the floor for the audience, and I'm sure that you have plenty of questions. It's not a question, just at the end of your two speeches, does the metaverse exist? In any ways, it's a question. Is it something as the tech industry loves to do, to create a new trendy world, just to help the lawyer to reinvent themselves? I don't know. But more seriously, I think that one of the first questions we have to work on, and it's part of the agenda, is really to identify what means metaverse, and what's the object of what we want to maybe regulate or not. Because when you talk about metaverse, you are talking about a lot of different concepts. It could be virtual reality with headsets, without any blockchain process. It could be blockchain without virtual reality headset. It could be both. And it's a collection of different technologies and combination of devices and virtual world. And I think that one of the first difficulty we have to deal with is to identify the object of what we want to regulate or not. And I'm not sure that we are already there in the work that has been done globally. And the second question is, when we talk about metaverse, do we talk about platform? That could be an easy answer. And so could we just use the DMA and DSA as existing regulation? We talk about this, but this is my first reaction. And you mentioned the symposium we had two years or 1 year ago with our German colleagues. And I remember the discussion we had on metaverse. And my first reaction at the time was to say, we have the DMA, and it's a perfect tool to handle what metaverse could be. And my third reaction, and I stop here, listening to you be controlling the controller, is what is maybe clear for me is that whatever is the metaverse, we will again and again use the compliance mechanism to help us to regulate, or use another word if you want, because it's a supervision of these players we need to organize. And compliance is a tool. We give them the power to organize their world, and we have to supervise what they are doing with this world, and to be sure they're aligned with our value and interest. Maybe I would say like Henri Roche, the motto of the compliance, but this is definitely, I think, where we are going in Europe, particularly with DMA, TSA compliance. I know that for commission lawyer is not perfectly expectation, but maybe part of the rate. I stop here. Question in the audience.
We have a question from the room, from Maria Teresa Mazzolino. If you want to get. Floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very big issue for me not being there with you and giving my warmest hello to everybody. I have a little question for the enforcers. You were talking about mergers and counterfactuals. I was wondering, as I've never been an enforcer, unfortunately, what is the most difficult part in building up counterfactuals? Guessing them, I mean, framing them, or collecting evidence about them and collecting the figures that can show that probably the counterfactual would be more pro-competitive than the scenario with the merger going on. Thank you.
Shall we? Okay. Maria Teresa, I'll try to answer. I mean, we have not case law because I'm unfortunate we have never addressed with a real proper killer acquisition. So with where the target was let's say potentially innovative competitor which was operating in a completely different market or even not operating at all. So I can answer saying that guessing is not that, it is difficult, but it is not that difficult. What is really difficult is to collect evidence and data about the counterfactual, the most probable counterfactual scenario, because I mean, in the case of innovative mergers, you can have even different innovative scenarios. The problem is how to weigh the different probabilities of the different scenario. And I think that it is crucial, it's really crucial, internal documents. This is the only evidence that we can use in order to have a significant assessment. And in this case, I don't want to appear too interventionist enforcer. I think that even when we assess merger, even when there is a merger review, I think that in some specific cases, we did it in the past as an Italian competition authority, down rates could be useful in order to collect this evidence. That's it.
Yeah, I think that there are really two big issues. You will have, if you have a number of possible or probable counterfactuals, should you pick one of them, or should you pick the worst case scenario, or should you do a kind of weighted average of all of them? And that's something on which the competition authority has ever decided. And the other issue is, what's the cost of making a mistake in these mergers? And the cost can be very, very high. So you're really in a different environment from the normal merger control environment, where type 1 and type 2 errors are a bit equivalent. In that case here, if you make a mistake, the cost may be very, very high and impossible to correct. Voilà.
If I can add just one thing, because I forgot, I think that in these mergers, again, it could be extremely helpful, and we have to consider it as within the European competition network as well, the inversion of the burden of proof.
Yes.
Nicola, you have a question.
Yeah, I have two questions. So I want to thank you both. Thanks, Marc, and thanks both for the great introductions to this complicated issue. So I have one question about method and one question about content or knowledge. So the question about method is how should antitrust people think about a future over which we have very imperfect information? Right? And in your remarks, you explained a little bit what we're all tempted to do, which is, we use what we have. So, mergers in the metaverse, abuse in the metaverse, agreement in the metaverse, or we say, oh, The long grab is what happened in the Microsoft case when the commission said that internet browsers would be the next way to do operating systems, which never happens. And the problem with that approach as a matter of method is that it's very difficult to predict that the future will replicate the past. So the tools that we had in the past might not embody the reality of the future. That's one. And the other thing is, which is related, is that you might have in these new worlds emergent behavior, transactions, or structural phenomena, hallucinations we talk about when we discuss with OpenAI and things of this kind, which don't exist in the real world. So the reality of the world that we are trying to understand might be very different. So how do you go about this? And frankly, I think the certainties that we have about how consumption operated in the economy until now, I don't know. I mean, we have to be open to the possibility that consumption might operate under very different principles. So how do you think about this? So that's my first question. And maybe that ties to what Henri said. We need to think of another governance paradigm for antitrust policy, which might be maybe more provisional, like you're just here and you tweak and you play and you experiment. So how would that work? So that's the first question. The second question is about the past. So we now sit on top of 25 years of experimentation with digital markets leading to the DMA in Europe and multiple legislative initiatives in the US. What have we learned from this about the welfare benefits and costs of various business models? Like advertisements or the free business model. And should this be, can we say something about this? Do we want advertisements everywhere in the metaverse? Do we want free in the metaverse? I mean, antitrust agencies seem very well positioned to talk about this, but never talk about this. So what's your take on various types of revenue models?
Thanks, Andrea. Who will start? Easy question.
We want to start? Not easy questions. I'll try if you like. I mean, even though most of these questions are, let's say, supranational issues, they affect supranational issues. So, I mean, at the national level, the experience inevitably is weaker. But I mean, anyway, I don't escape. I don't run away. I think that the replication of the past and the knowledge about the future, which is, I mean, by and large, your first question, I think that it's very difficult to understand the future. I'm pretty sure that to reply the past, both on the enforcement side, but also considering that the efficiency of the past, there were a slide focusing on this issue in my presentation. So the efficiency of the past is not meaningful, especially in innovative sectors, innovative markets, whatever you like. So when we apply, because it is a sound, we have evidence, we have a lot of experience about the efficiency of the past. The efficiency of the past is not the tomorrow's efficiency. So this is a mistake for sure. On the other side, we have to take a risky decision because, I mean, the evidence about the future is very fragile. And this is the reason why, in replying to Maria Teresa, I think that the inversion of the burden of proof could be an important step. I mean, if I want that the merger has to be authorized and I want to buy a target that, according to the, let's say, concerns of a competition authority, could be dangerous, I think that I have to convince you that my final goal is different from the exclusion of a rival. This is concerning mergers. So when I look at the past, I think that the tools of the past should be updated. I try to say in my presentation as well. But I also think that the past has to be changed in order to be slightly more dynamic. And in doing that, of course, competition enforcers take risks. and the cost of such a risk could be quite high. And this is the reason why I would offer the parties to explain, to have the burden of proof, to say, okay, it's a virtuous conduct, it's a virtuous merger, and I try to explain it. This could be, an imperfect answer, but I think it might be. The other one was benefits and costs of the business models in the digital world. Now we are all used to see that the final market, when money appears, is advertising. I mean, we are speaking about metaverses, data, whatever, but where there is cash is in the display advertising, in the, where there are somebody who pays. Because data, the new currency, priceless markets, fantastic issues for fantastic debates. But at the end of the day, if I'm an entrepreneur, I have to sell something and to obtain money at the end of the day. I'm not sure that this will be the final, the business model of the future. Not because money will disappear. No, money will be central as well. But I think that, the advertisers won't be necessarily the only payers. Possibly we will see that the final market will be something else, but I'm not sure. This is the reason why, again, I reread continuously, learn to walk before we run. And this is the reason why I'm so skeptical about a per se regulation, self-executive regulation. Now the train has left the station, so the digital markets is there, and we do our best to make it as effective as possible, complementary with the competition law. So, but regulation is very, very difficult. If the application of competition, if the enforcement of competition law is difficult, regulation is even more difficult in continuously changing and dynamic markets. So your question, where business models, the only thing I feel to say is that sometimes there is the risk, not only the per se temptation, but there is the risk to judge business models. Business models are free. It is not up to competition agencies to say if that business model is bad or good. So business models are relatively, if business model imply restrictive conducts, it's something different. But the business models are, if the business models inevitably requires that winner takes all, and some of these business models can have such a outcome, I think that we have to consider it. But a business model is a business model. We'll see if the business model could imply restrictions of competition law. I don't know if I did my best.
Henri, if you want to compare this. The answer on the second question is easy. I have no opinion on business models. And then the first question, it's so I was trying to explain that to me there are two issues with digital industry, or let's say the metaverse. One is the information asymmetry, and the other one is how to make sure that there would be an internalization of principles, competition rules principles, when actually this may be linked to new theories of harm. So you have to anticipate that, or so maybe you can say some kind of compliance, or it could be an early on interaction between the competition agency and the company in question. I think it's also mostly in making sure that the processes which are set, so it could be mostly programming, it would be auditable and adaptable as well. And so that's this kind of avenue that is being investigated for artificial intelligence.
This is the AI that.
Gravity. So what we have new that is being explored in as regards artificial intelligence, and there is, I think there is a lot of intellectual effort to be put on that, in making sure that that both companies, when they develop code, actually make it in a way, or code in a very general way, make it in a way that it can be later on auditable and challengeable.
Yes.
From Simonetta Vezoso, who cannot speak, so I'm going to read her question. Regulation of possible different metaverses is already happening, such as by the GDPR, DSA, AI Act. Should competition authorities closely collaborate with other regulators and do some purposeful market engineering?
Sorry, the last sentence.
All the last sentence?
Only that. Should we collaborate with that?
With other regulators and do some purposeful market engineering.
Okay. I stress in my intervention that it's crucial, the collaboration, the cooperation with the other institutions. It's difficult, it's costly. We speak different languages, but I mean, it is the challenge that we have to do. We have to face. I mean, we did it in the past with regulators. We have to do it with other institutions like the Data Privacy Agency, but it is mandatory. I mean, antitrust enforcement is not self-sufficient. The DMA now is on the table, and there will be just, I would say, residual scope. Not that residual, I hope, for competition law, but I mean, there is an important regulatory tool on the table. We'll see how it will work, but I mean, in working with the DG.Com, with the regulators, we have to collaborate.
First of all, here we have a number of public policy objectives which are linked to distinct market failures in a way. But the general outcome that we want for society is a maximization of each of the public policy objectives through coordination or cooperation between the various enforcers or regulators. So that's a kind of a mathematical approach to it. And then what does it mean in practice? That means that we have to take a stance, for instance, as regards privacy, be it mandated privacy or privacy protection, which would go beyond what is mandated by the regulation. Because it's also sometimes a competition parameter, and because it's a competition parameter, we have to take a stance on it. So, is it to what extent does the behavior at stake does it protect my privacy, or to what extent is it disproportionate in order to protect privacy? And in order to take that stance, we need expert opinion, and that expert opinion is going to come from the regulator, the privacy regulator, for instance. Now, it's a bit complicated in Europe with the privacy regulation structure. So sometimes the competition authority take a stance on its own, like Bundeskartellamt did, and we'll see what the BCJ will say. We know already what Rontos, the Advocate General, has said about that, but there is clearly a need for expertise, and also we also need to provide our own expertise so that solutions adopted for other public policy objectives are the most pro-competitive possible, or the least anti-competitive possible.
I have other questions. I have a ton of questions. Yeah, so
Slightly simpler than the other.
okay, I'm going to try to be very concrete. So, oftentimes, I mean, you know that better than I because you're economists, but oftentimes when there's a new technological paradigm inside, incumbent business organizations tend to take a different trajectory to the technology, right? And so my understanding is what we're seeing now is we're seeing some companies that are investing a lot in gaming, others are investing a lot in payments, others are investing a lot or maybe at the same time in hardware like VR headsets and things of this kind. So what would be, I mean, you know, from what you hear and what you see, you know, what are the main, are there other trajectories? And which are, you believe, the trajectories which hold the most potential to make impact for an existing business organization or a new one?
I go first. This is the reason
That's
why.
more concrete, right?
Eh?
That's more concrete.
No, no, it's very concrete,
Okay.
and this is the reason why I use the plural in my presentation. I always spoke of metaverses. And this is the reason why, because there are so different metaverses. I'm trying to answer also the original question from Marc. I mean, there are so different objectives. And I think that even though the trajectories, the technological trajectories might overlap, if you like, I think that in strictly competitive terms, they are, of course, potential rivals, but at present they are operating in quotation marks different markets. So we have to consider it when we have to assess the risk of collusion, of the risk of, generally speaking, competition restrictions. So unless we, as Fabiana said, we are looking at a persistent single metaverse 2042, when you'll ask the question to somebody else. But seriously speaking, I think that metaverses is important to use the final S. It has implications for competition as well.
I have no view. It's just fun to watch. Very low. You have an answer or question?
Question, sorry, is related to what you have said in the introduction, that there are some public interest. And I was wondering whether competition regulation may help to design some public space within the metaverses. Metaverses are only private spaces that are handled by companies. I guess it won't work that way. At one moment, you will need to. I think someone is going to talk about the interoperability, but you will need to go beyond the segmentation of the market, because you will need to have an offer which is in another space and so forth, but we will need to have public spaces. So I was wondering whether competition law may help, or competition or regulation may help to find those public spaces in between those private spaces.
I can quote my colleague. I mean, it's not an insult, but I'm not a regulator. So what I think that if competition law could help, for instance, facilitating the access to different metaverses, to the data of the different metaverses, if there is an essential facility problem. If there is not, you can regulate, but for different reasons based on public interest, and it's not our task. For instance, if there are something concerning safety, health, or whatever, there are huge good reasons in order to regulate the access to metaverses. But from an antitrust point of view, the only thing that I can say, I mean, if there is a problem of access to the infrastructure, to the metaverse, it is because it is the only way to do something, and that cannot be duplicated. So there is an essential facility problem. It's very rare anyway. Yeah? It's very, very rare. There are other good reasons, but again, it's not an insult, but I'm not a regulator. I think that it is perfectly reasonable to regulate for these reasons. But it is not, don't ask competition the competition. Don't ask antitrust agencies. Otherwise, I mean, so many goals. It means that at the end of the day, competition authorities do not work at all. I mean, the first lesson you learn when you study economics is one goal, one tool. That's it. It's a pity, but it works like that.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by public space, but it reminds me of one of the advertisements by Facebook on Metaverse, where you can see in ancient Greece agora, you know, the youngsters going and witnessing, you know, Socrates speaking with Platon. So I don't know whether it's that what you have in mind or something else, but the in a way it's linked to, if it's that, it's a very interesting, sometimes a bit sad, natural experiment of direct democracy. When you look at some social networks and how, you know, debates are developing, do they and that really points to the need for moderation. Then who should do the moderation?
Yes, one additional question here, because we are talking about metaverse from what we already know. And in fact, we are talking about platform in some way. And business models that could, some business model we know and other that could be created in the future. But if we look a little bit further with the metaverse, maybe we will be in a new universe, really, for people. Maybe not us, but more our kids and their kids. And I wonder if it would make sense for a competition authority, not a regulator, you got the point, for a competition authority and an author, to work with other like neurologists, psychologists. I know our colleague, Marc, work on the economy of attention. There is a lot of impact to the metaverse that could have a role in the way we interact as humans and with outcome and competition. But maybe the way to handle this new aspect will require to work with other disciplinaries. Again, I say doctors, could be psychologists, could be sociologists, data scientists for sure. But do you think that for a competition authority, which is a little beyond what you do day to day, you will have to interact with this range of new players to help understanding and managing, controlling, enforcing what the metaverse will be?
A better understanding, for sure, it's useful. We already do it in a way. For a better, let's say, enforcement, I'm speaking for the Italian Competition Authority, but I mean, possibly even more, even something more has done by other national and European competition authority. We have begun to dialogue with, for instance, data scientists in order to have a better technological understanding of what we were going to regulate, let's say, quotation marks. In the future, for a better understanding, we have already done in the past to have hearings with sociologists. So, for instance, when we try to understand how the media markets work, we had continuous. We had some dialogue with different players. I'm not sure, but I mean, possibly I'm slave of my small numbers. We are no more than 250 with at least 2 big competence. For antitrust, we just work with 120 people. So, I mean, there is a problem of scarce resources. In the future, we can benefit for sure. I mean, from my point of view, eclecticism and interdisciplinary works are absolutely fruitful. If I should say if it is probable, I'm not sure.
it's a fair point, huh? That they were resource constrained. So to take an example, we hear a lot about bad patterns, or put differently, choice architecture for users, or the individuals or business users to make choices, and how that may lead to increasing barriers to entry for a number of companies, a number of markets. How do you deal with that? Do we have internally the competences to analyze the choice architecture, or should we actually use resources from outside and then based on what resources, or should we actually look at how the company itself has built the choice architecture? And I think going forward, your point is very fair. We'll face that more and more often in a number of cases, and we'll be facing the issue of resources.
Yes, there is one more question.
No,
Yeah.
I have a question. First, a remark. Some journalist said that if you replace the word metaverse with cyberspace, doesn't change much in any sentence, in any context. So that's just a remark.
He said 90% in his remark.
Sorry?
He said 90%. For 90% of a sentence.
Oh, so we read the same article, right?
For 90% it does.
And another quick question for Marc Mossé. You mentioned blockchain as being an aspect of the metaverse, and I would like to understand to what extent you think this is the case. And my third quick question is about collaboration between different competition authorities. Do you see any merit in the competition among competition authorities to find out the best way to protect consumer interest in the context which you abundantly described as being characterized by lack of knowledge of the future? So why don't we try competition for competition authorities? Or to preserve that competition, not increase concentration.
I start from
You start, and then
because I mean the first two questions are I don't know how to answer. I mean, my answer is that the only thing that I can say strongly that if there is a successful story within the antitrust community at the European level is the European Competition Network, where there is a strong cooperation. There is no need of concentration. Sometimes they would like to be a step higher, but I mean, they're not. I mean, I'm joking, of course. So European Competition Network is really a successful story where the best practice should emerge, where cooperation is really cooperative. So this is my concrete answer. Once in a while, we have a concrete example of a successful story. And in fact, if I want to be just provoking, it is a pity that such a framework, it is not fully used when we have to deal with the Digital Markets Act. That's it.
Just to add to that, I would rather say emulation among competition authorities and competition, and then you have a number of proposals to pool resources. So, for instance, the Dutch Competition Authority has suggested that there would be a pooling of data scientists, for instance, when implementing and other kind of categories of staff when implementing the DMA, in order to help the European Commission in doing its investigation. There was a question for you
On blockchain. Yeah. No, my point was to illustrate the fact that metaverse is something with different aspects. Some metaverses works without blockchain, and this is virtual reality we can use on gaming, for example, or entertainment. You can attend a show, a musical show, or I don't know what in the metaverse, and you don't need to use the blockchain, but it exists also other metaverse model like the Sandbox or Decentraland, using the blockchain, which is a peer-to-peer mechanism, and in particular to use the NFT, and to have, back to the question of business model, to have another way of monetizing the interaction between humans, and this is another way to develop metaverse with a layer which is quite interesting, and it's more on the institution, which is the decentralized autonomous organization, which is something extremely interesting, quite difficult to understand and to really handle as a concept, but that could have a lot of impact, including for the lawyer, including for the way you can organize compliance within the metaverse. And this it was my point, but you can go further, but it could take a lot of time. And I think if there is no more question, we can have a move to something which is very different from the metaverse, but everybody will enjoy, which is I see the Calisson break.
Yes, there is a Calisson break.
I'm sure that everybody will agree on this.
So, once again, thank you very much, Andrea and Henri and Marc, for this wonderful work. Now we're going to have a break in the Salle des Doctorants, just a few doors. It's going to be a Calisson break. So, for the people who are online, I think we're going to come back in 20 to 30 minutes, maybe starting with Valeria. Okay.
Sure. Hi to each of you. Hi.
Nice to see you. I think we're going to be a little short on time. I go last. Valeria, then you introduce it.